Thank you very much. It was nice to emerge from seat 21A and actually make it out of the airport. I've actually been to Frankfurt about 20 times, and this weekend was the very first time I actually stepped out of the airport. And it's in a beautiful city. It's amazing. And so now Frankfurt's forever changed in my mind. It's not about duty-free shops and the Star Alliance Lounge, but it's actually about an amazing museum and an amazing opportunity at the TEDx talk. So thank you very much for spending your Sunday with us. It's an honor to be here and to share a little bit about our lives and what we're doing. And I want to talk a little bit about our work in Africa and our work in helping getting life-saving treatment to people with HIV/AIDS. I co-founded an organization called BroadReach Healthcare about 10 years ago with my best friend from medical school. And the original ideas of BroadReach happened probably about 20 years ago when we were naive medical students, and we were staying up all night supposedly studying for exams, but really talking about how one day we were going to save the world. And I started with my best friend, Ernest Darko, and Ernest and I have very parallel lives. He was born in the US of parents from Africa, but then he mostly grew up in East Africa. I'm actually half Asian. I was born in Asia. I moved around the world a lot, and when I was a college student, I spent time volunteering with the Red Cross in 1992 in Sierra Leone, working with refugees. So some of those horrible stories that Judge Song talked about was what I experienced as a 21-year-old firsthand, seeing the tragedy. And when Ernest and I got together for these supposed study sessions, we used to talk about things like, how come in the face of such human tragedy, you can be in the most remote areas, but you can still get Coca-Cola, beer, cigarettes. Not that I purchased the beer or the cigarettes, at least that's what I told my parents, but just the Coca-Cola. But what could we learn from the private sector and merge it into public health? Because at the same locations, you could never find a doctor, you could never find a nurse, you could never find a pill. So I want to talk a little bit about sort of our work and how that's sort of transformed our thinking. So in the theme of today's talk, I want to start with one fact. And that fact is that there are 6.2 million people in sub-Saharan Africa who are on HIV/AIDS treatment. 6.2 million people. And the bulk of them came on to treatment probably in the last 6 or 7 years. And I want to tell this story as I've been privileged to be on the front lines to witness this tragic, but in many ways heroic event that I think will mark, certainly when the historians look back at us 100 years from now, will definitely mark as one of probably the most pivotal and probably most tragic, but maybe one of the most successful events of our time. So I want to look at it in two aspects. First of all, just put it in context. What is the current situation in Africa? So you can just, around the world, just so you can understand it. And then more importantly, bring it down to the level of a single patient. What does it take to get that one pill into a patient's mouth? So let's talk about the big picture. And I think this says it all. Basically, demand side. The fact that there are 34 million people in the world who are HIV positive, of whom about 2/3 are in sub-Saharan Africa. Roughly 23 million people live with the HIV virus in sub-Saharan Africa. About 3,000 people die every single day in sub-Saharan Africa because they don't have access to treatment. There are 15 million orphans in sub-Saharan Africa, children who will never know their parents and who will be raised outside of traditional structures. And at the same time, on the supply side, we have in sub-Saharan Africa probably one of the lowest budgets. Roughly about $100 is spent per year per patient for any sort of healthcare in Africa. In the US, it's about $8,000. There are about 10 times as many doctors in the US per capita than there are in sub-Saharan Africa. So you have a situation with overwhelming numbers. At the same time, you have very little money, very few doctors, very few nurses, very few clinics, very few hospitals. It's a huge challenge. Okay, so in that context, let's sort of drop down then to the individual patient. What does it really take to actually get a pill into a patient's mouth? There's your answer. So basically, I've violated every rule of a good PowerPoint presentation. I used very small text. I made it really complicated to impress you, to think that I actually know what I'm talking about. The reality is it's a lot messier than this, but this is almost a process flow of what happens to a patient when they go from being diagnosed with HIV all the way to actually taking treatment. And all the things that actually need to happen. It doesn't talk about the research, the policy, the donors, all the stuff that happens upstream. This focuses really on the last mile. So let's look at the first piece. So this is my attempt at computer artistry. I unfortunately could never sing, couldn't write, I couldn't play a musical instrument. So I became a doctor, and this is what I do. So let's talk about patients. So what does it take to actually get a patient to overcome severe stigma, who live in rural areas, who may have to walk for days to actually get to a clinic and wait in line, to overcome different socio-cultural understandings of illness to actually get tested? And the other challenging thing about this is that most people who have HIV don't know they have the virus. They don't know for many years because you don't have any symptoms. So there is no motivation to go get tested. I'm going to show a couple of video clips of actual patients, and these are videos that we made in South Africa as educational videos that we show across government hospitals in South Africa.
Ndiyakuthanda upheka, ucoca indlu, kunye nokuhlamba impahla. Into endingayithandiyo sisitiya. Ndiyaya nje ke kuba kusiyiwa kodwa hayi andisithandi. Ngo-2002 ndaye ndafumanisa uba ndintsholongwane kagawulayo. Kwakukudala ndifuna ukuzivavanya igazi kuba ndandibona iimpawu. Ndandinontoluphalo ongapheliyo. Isimandamane sasasweleka ngo-2002 emva kokugula. Ndaye ndaqokelela ukuba ndiye kuzivavanya igazi. Kwakungelula konke konke. Ndandisoyika. Kodwa kwakungcono ukuba ndizazi kunoba ndingazazi.
Okay. So there's the first step. Somebody needs to take the decision to go get tested, and it can take many years, and there's a lot of obstacles to get there. But now you actually get to the clinic, and then you actually have to confront taking the test.
Ingaba ndiza kuzifumana ngoku iziphumo zam?
Kwimizuzu elishumi elinesihlanu uza kuzifumana iziphumo zakho kodwa emva kokuba ndivavanyile uzawukhanselishwa ngeziphumo zakho. Ndicela igazi emnweni wakho ukuze ndikwazi ukuvavanya ngalo. Ndiza kuphinda ke kabini kuba sifuna elinye igazi lokuvavanya okwesibini. Andizokuvisa ubuhlungu, ndiyathembisa.
Ndaye ndaya ekliniki ndayavavanywa igazi. Ikhansela yandixelela ukuba uma ndiye ndabona imigca emibini, loo nto ithetha ukuba ndi-HIV positive. Uba umgca mnye, ndi-HIV negative.
Iziphumo zakho zibuyile ke sisi. Ufumaniseke ukuba unayo intsholongwane kagawulayo egazini lakho.
Nangona nje ndandifuna ukuyovavanya igazi, kodwa emva kokuba ndifumanisile ukuba ndintsholongwane kagawulayo, khange ndonwabe. Ndandizibuza ukuba ndizabaxelela kanjani na abantu basekhaya. Abantu basekhaya babengenalwazi oluphangaleleyo ngesifo sikagawulayo. Ngoko ke ndandisoyika ukubaxelela.
Khululeka sisi, ukuxakeka yinto eqhelekileyo xa ufumana iziphumo obungazilindelanga. Thatha ixesha lakho ucinge ukuba ngubani ongamxelela ngezi ziphumo kwaye siyintoni isizathu sokuba ukhethe loo mntu ukuba uxelele yena ngezi ziphumo zakho.
Ndathi xa ndifika ekhaya, bandibuza ukuba ndihambe njani sibanika iipilisi andibaxelelanga nyaniso kwaphela. Heyi, zahamba iintsuku, iiveki kunye neenyanga inditya le nto apha ngaphakathi.
So you can see from a very personal perspective the real challenges that somebody faces, the emotions, the stigma, having to tell their family, having to tell their friends. But once you're tested positive, you can go for years without actually requiring treatment. So what happens next? You have to keep on going back to that same clinic where maybe you wait in line for 8 hours. You have to keep on getting tests. Those test results have to come back. And then maybe finally one day, you actually meet the clinical criteria for actually getting put on ARVs. And then once you get put on the ARVs, you actually have to take these pills in the same way every single day for the rest of your life, because it's not a cure. It just suppresses the virus. And these pills have side effects. There are stockouts in the clinics. Sometimes you move. There are huge, huge challenges that patients face just to get that one pill in their mouth. And then to make it happen, what are all the things that actually have to happen? You have to have a clinic that has staff, that has money, that actually has a supply chain that works to make sure they get the tests, the drugs there. You have to have a whole entire logistics systems to make sure you can transport blood samples back and forth, that the results actually get to the doctor, they actually get to the patient. And at the same time, you have a patient who often is suffering from severe side effects of these medicines, and so they stop taking them. Or their family finds out that they're taking medicines, and because of shame or stigma, they stop. So it is incredibly, incredibly complicated to get one patient on HIV treatment in sub-Saharan Africa. In reality, when you look at the newspaper reports, when you hear the fact that there's billions of dollars being given, that there are millions of people on HIV drugs, you think, well, you know, that's a pretty interesting statistic. But when you actually look at the human face and understand what actually has to happen, not only at the last mile, which we just talked about, but what leaders stood up to make sure that there was funding, what academics and researchers and private sector organizations made sure that there were drugs, what NGOs, what volunteers actually got on the ground, and most importantly, the patients, and actually overcoming their personal fears and their personal struggles and having the courage to actually step up and to go to that clinic and to face a lifetime of treatment. It's a lot. However, we have a long way to go. The 6.2 million people who are on treatment in Africa represent about half the people who actually need treatment. So you can be HIV positive, but you don't need treatment until you hit certain clinical criteria. We've made lots of mistakes. We have learned a lot. There have been a lot of successes and there's been a lot of tragedies, but there's still no prevention and there's still no cure. And today, 3,000 people will die in sub-Saharan Africa of HIV/AIDS. Now, I want to return back to that one point, 6.2 million. So we went and we explored, what does 6.2 million mean? It's complicated. It takes a lot to get there. And I want to actually bring that complication back down into one significant fact or one significant takeaway. And that, for me, being somebody who's actually witnessed this on the front lines, that while we're not there, we're not even halfway there, to have 6.2 million people on antiretroviral therapy represents the power of the human spirit, the power of all these thousands of people to come together to actually make sure the money's available, that the drugs are available, and more importantly, that the people on the ground who are infected with this virus actually have the courage to stand up and to actually go get tested and to lead a life and take these drugs with serious side effects to face the stigma. And I think it is this overwhelming example of the power of the human spirit that is my takeaway message. What can we do in the environment? We heard talks about the environment. We heard talks about the justice system. We heard talks about the arts. Imagine what if we could take just 2%, 3% of the human spirit that came together for those 6.2 million people to get treatment, and we applied it to other aspects of our lives. We are all doing pretty very interesting things, whether it's in these different disciplines, whether it's at home, whether it's with your family. And so I think my takeaway from this one fact of 6.2 million is do not underestimate the power of the human spirit. And let's all be messengers about this, and let's all be examples about taking the power of the human spirit to actually make the world a better place. Thank you very much.